For those of us who have parents or older family members who are narcissistic, I'm afraid I have bad news for you. I'm going to apologize in advance, but honestly, I wish someone had told me this before. I would have liked to have been prepared for it, and I think it will help you too to know this information. Today's episode is about aging narcissists. Buckle up, it is not looking good. Welcome to Waking Up from Narc Abuse, a micro podcast by Alana Sanborn. This is a micro podcast. It's meant to start your thoughts flowing. It's meant to be the beginning of a conversation, a dialogue, not a monologue. Because we're talking about something that's pretty heavy, my hope is that shorter episodes that are easier to digest will help you without overwhelming you. And here is today's show. So lately I've had older narcissistic folks on my mind, partially because I know some people who are getting older who have these troubling qualities, and partially because I have a few clients dealing with this right now. And you know how in a lot of cultures, we have this concept of a person growing more wise with age. They gather wisdom as they go through life, and they become this mellow, enlightened being that spews epic one-liners when you need some good advice. Well, if you know a narcissistic person who's getting older, maybe in their 70s or above, I'm afraid you shouldn't hold your breath while waiting for them to become that sage sitting cross-legged on the mount. It's not going to happen. In fact, what I've learned is that oftentimes older narcissistic people have become actually worse than ever as they age. Their symptoms that might have been hurtful or annoying or even downright cruel can become even more heightened in their older age. Now, this feels like a good moment to take a pause and just mention that while coming up with this topic and thinking about it, I recognize that there are some overlaps in what I'm talking about with ageism or even ableism, because what I'm talking about is someone whose cognitive faculties have declined, perhaps. Maybe they're more forgetful, and someone who may be less mobile as they get older, whose body's changed a lot. And typically, in especially the Western culture that I live in, we tend to see folks with maybe disabilities or who are aged as frail or weak or less, what's the word? We see them as like less menacing, harmless, lovable, those kinds of things. And that is actually ageism and ableism all wrapped into one. But I think that's where we also sort of get caught up in thinking that it's possible that someone as they get older might finally be nicer or grow a little or learn something or be more wise. And unfortunately, with folks who are this emotionally immature, it's just not true. So I just want to acknowledge that what I'm talking about might kind of overlap with ageism or ableism a little, or sound like I'm being ageist or ableist. And if you feel like I am, I apologize. Feel free to reach out to me. But I do want to say it's kind of a call out to ableism and ageism to notice that someone who has reduced mobility or has declined cognitively is not necessarily a kind person or a nice person, that those stereotypes are ridiculous, and that especially in the case of someone who has aged and they are narcissistic, it's actually really dangerous to think that. So I just wanted to acknowledge that for the moment, and now I'll continue on. If your parent or grandparent or uncle or whomever used to be inattentive, ridicule you, manipulate you, or whatever, you can expect them to do it even more as they become less capable of masking their behavior or hiding behind niceties. Or perhaps they are more intense because they're more needy or dependent. It kind of feels like a cruel joke that their behaviors or their symptoms have worsened. because you might have been hoping all this time that they would learn something as they got older, or they would become more wise, like I said. And what you're going to wake up to is the fact that they have potentially become way worse, and it's never going to end. Another cruel joke is that if this is like, say, a parent of yours, they may be someone who needs caretaking soon, or they may be someone you're already caretaking. So they might be more dependent on you than ever, but also meaner than ever. And their lack of ability to truly show that they care for you and are paying attention to your needs might have become even more pronounced as they become more and more forgetful and self-absorbed. It's like the universe is saying, remember all those things they did that really hurt you? Well, it can get worse. It can always get worse. And you're still susceptible to it, and they are still capable of it. In a way, it's a good reminder to not let your guard down, to not be fooled by a body that's beginning to appear more frail, and to once again examine your biases or your cultural conditioning around what you expect, let's just say, a parent or an elder to be like versus what you have in your life, the reality, because it might be starkly different. If you're imagining this sort of helpless, loving, sweet, older adult that you finally get to have some kind of close, compassionate experience with, you might be sorely mistaken by what you actually have in your life, which is someone who looks the part, potentially, but is pretty awful to you, and someone you might need protection from, truly. If you're anything like the people that I typically work with, and I'm guessing you are, then this is probably going to screw with your head, because you want to be a loving, sweet, kind person yourself. And it's hard to see someone who's an elder, especially, as someone who's mean or cruel. But this is the reality. And that's why I'm trying to be brutally honest with you here and not sugarcoat anything, because the more you face it, the better you can prepare yourself for how it's going to feel internally and what you're going to need to do to take care of yourself as far as boundaries and guidelines go for dealing with this person or cutting them out of your life. It's also just really sad. And so I want to acknowledge that this sucks. You didn't choose this, and it's not your fault, and you have no control over it, and it really sucks. So there's that. What I hope you gather from this information is that it's not going to get better. And while I know that's super depressing and not very encouraging, I believe it's way better to be a realist about narcissistic people than it is to hold on to unlikely slivers of hope that just give you crushing disappointment eventually. So the better you prepare yourself for expecting the worst from them, the less you might be hurt, and the less your life will be impacted by their behaviors. That's my theory. I think that if you know they're going to continue to be manipulative and demanding as they age, and maybe even worse, you can get your boundaries in check and not let yourself be swayed by guilt or a sense of duty when they try to con you in whatever way they try next, because they might get pretty creative. You can make a plan for how you'll deal with the struggle of caring for yourself while also dealing with this elderly person who has never managed to gain any wisdom or enlightenment, and unfortunately continues to be scary or inconsiderate or conniving. Just know it doesn't get better, but you do. You continue to do better, to learn better, to feel better, to be better. You are continuing to grow. You are not them. And the way that you handle yourself as they get worse, it says everything about you. That's all for today. Good luck out there, and as always, take care of yourself.